Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining me today. It is the end of summer and the beginning of fall, which means it is the end of summer reading season. And that means that it is time for another semi-annual recap of what I've been reading. To be honest, it's not like my summer reading list is that different from my fall or winter reading list, but with the changing of the seasons, it seems like a good time to do a what I'm reading and what I plan to be and what I plan to read next kind of video. So I have some books for some tapping, some talking, some good sounds, and if that sounds good to you, let's get straight to it. I'll start with the book that I finished most recently, and that is Endurance, Shackleton's Incredible Voyage. This is the true story of Ernest Shackleton and his ship, the Endurance, during their voyage to Antarctica in 1914. On their voyage, they were shipwrecked due to pack ice. The ship was crushed by ice surrounding the continent, and they were ultimately shipwrecked for, I won't say how long, but it was a long time. So it says, bound for Antarctica, where polar explorer Ernest Shackleton planned to cross on foot the last uncharted continent, the Endurance set sail from England in August 1914. In January 1915, after battling its way for 6 weeks through 1,000 miles of pack ice, and now only a day's sail short of its destination, the Endurance became locked inside an island of ice. For 10 months, the ice-moored Endurance drifted northwest before it was finally crushed. But for Shackleton and his crew of 27 men, the ordeal had just begun. I won't give away any spoilers, but I do love survival stories, so this book was gifted to me by a very close friend who had finished reading it and thought that I might like it as well. And I did. I like survival stories. I like true stories that are just completely mind-blowing. And this definitely fits that criteria. So this is Endurance, Shackleton's Incredible Voyage, and I just finished it a couple of days ago. Before I read The Endurance, I read this little title right here. You may have heard of it. One of the most popular stories ever told, Dracula has been recreated for the stage and screen hundreds of times in the last century. Yet, it is essentially a Victorian saga, an awesome tale of a thrillingly bloodthirsty vampire whose nocturnal atrocities reflect the dark underside of a supremely moralistic age. Above all, Dracula is a quintessential story of suspense and horror, boasting one of the most terrifying creatures in literature. Centuries-old Count Dracula, whose diabolical passions prey upon the innocent, the helpless, the beautiful. That description, I think, makes the story sound a lot scarier than it actually is. But I can imagine that if you read it in 1897 when it first came out, it would be indeed terrifying. This story is I think the word is epistolary novel, meaning that it is told through diary entries, news clippings, things of that nature. And it jumps back and forth between multiple protagonists, one of them being Jonathan Harker, and then his fiancée Mina, of course Van Helsing, among other characters. I liked the switch back and forth between multiple characters. I think it helped build or add to the suspense of the novel, because it would kind of leave you on a cliffhanger when one character's point of view ends and then it jumps to another character. I really, really, really enjoyed reading this. I have been trying to read more classic literature, and I greatly enjoyed reading Dracula. I think it's so interesting to think about what was considered terrifying in that day and age, what was considered horrifying, what really put people on edge. And thriller and horror is such a genre for exploring societal fears. And I think that Bram Stoker did an excellent job. I would really recommend this book because I think we all think we know the story of Dracula, but there were so many things that surprised me that get taken out in most retellings of Dracula. So even though I was somewhat familiar with the story, there was lots of kind of twists and turns that kept me guessing. So I would recommend Dracula if it sounds interesting to you. And then before that, I read Sunrise, Sunrise, on the Reaping. This, if you are not aware, is a prequel to the Hunger Games trilogy, one of two prequels since Ballad of Songbird and Snakes already exists, and I covered it in a previous video. But this book tells the story of Hamish Abernathy's Hunger Games. If you don't know, Hamish Abernathy was Katniss and Peeta's mentor in the original Hunger Games trilogy and a victor of his very own Hunger Games. I could not put this book down. I think I finished it in maybe 3 days. Typically, I read a little bit every morning before work, but I found myself reading this book at every given opportunity. It is very well written. It's not a necessarily challenging read. It is a YA book, so it's intended for a slightly younger audience than myself, but I found it very, very engaging and very hard to put down. Here we have a snake and a mockingjay. And of course, I don't want to give anything away, but this will come up later in the book. So if you're wondering what this is, what this symbol is, I would just say, read the book and you'll find out. If you haven't read the first Hunger Games prequel, Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, I would recommend reading that before this. It isn't necessary, but there's some world building that happens in that book that is useful for this one. Reading this book really put me back on a Hunger Games kick. I ended up rewatching all of the movies. Well, rewatching the first two movies, and I had never seen Mockingjay Part 1 and 2, so I ended up watching those as well. I remember that when they came out in theaters, I was just annoyed that they had split the book into two different movies, so I kind of boycotted it. But I know a movie for this is coming out next year, and I'm looking forward to it. And then finally, on the books that I've already read, is this book, Womb City. Womb City by Tlotlo Tsamase. Tlotlo Tsamase. I believe they are a Botswanian author. Yes, correct. This is a kind of sci-fi, dystopian, futuristic novel, and I really wanted to like it, but I honestly couldn't finish it. I got about a third of the way through, and then I just gave up. There's a lot of interesting concepts in the novel, however, for me, there was just too much going on at once, and I found it really hard to keep track of what was going on. So I gave it a try, but it ultimately was not for me. So those are some of the books I've been reading recently. Next, I'll talk about what I'm reading currently and what I plan on reading next. Currently, I am reading this book, The Buffalo Hunter by Stephen Graham Jones. I just started this a couple of days ago. I've gotten about this far. Buffalo Hunter is a horror novel set in 1912 in Montana, and involves an altercation between the settlers, the colonizers in Montana, and the Blackfeet Native Americans. Stephen Graham Jones himself is an indigenous author and a member of the Blackfeet tribe. I believe he lives in either Montana or maybe Denver. Colorado Boulder. Yeah, so Boulder, Colorado. This is a horror novel. I'm not sure, but I think it's a vampire novel, which is kind of funny because I just finished Dracula. So I haven't gotten that far, but there's some inklings, some hints that it's going to end up being kind of a monster novel. Maybe a vampire, maybe something else. I don't want to give too much away. I'll read the inside cover as long as it doesn't get too gruesome, I guess. This chilling historical novel is set in the nascent days of the state of Montana, following a Blackfeet Indian named Good Stab as he haunts the fields of the Blackfeet Nation looking for justice. Begins when a diary written in 1912 by a Lutheran pastor is discovered within a wall in 2012. And then it gets a little unrelaxing. But just like Dracula, this is an epistolary novel. I really hope that that's the right word. If it's not, make fun of me in the comments, that's fine. So it is also told through diary entries. So I think that there's some inspiration drawn from maybe Dracula or Bram Stoker. This has been a little bit slow to start, but I'm only, I don't know, maybe 80 pages in. It's been a little slow to start, but it has been recommended to me, so I'm hopeful that it will pick up. Next, let's talk about what I'm planning on reading next. So first up is this book. You may have heard of it. This is Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. Frankenstein, Frankenstein. Written in 1816 when she was only 19 years old, Mary Shelley's novel of the modern Prometheus chillingly dramatized the dangerous potential of life begotten on a laboratory table. A frightening creation myth for our own time, Frankenstein remains one of the greatest horror stories ever written and is an undisputed classic of its kind. Reading Dracula really made me want to read Frankenstein because they are so heavily associated with each other in our modern culture. However, I think it's so interesting that when Dracula was written, Frankenstein had already been out for over 80 years. So this was already a classic by the time Dracula was written. Just like Dracula, it's told through diary entries. So I'm really interested to read this next and compare it with Dracula, which I, as I said, greatly enjoyed. I think it's incredible that this book was written when she was only 19 years old and has become such a cornerstone in not only horror, but kind of the culture as a whole. Everyone knows Frankenstein, and I think maybe this year or maybe early next year, a new adaptation, a new film adaptation is coming out. I think Oscar Isaac playing Dr. Frankenstein, if I remember correctly. So I have not read this yet, but I'm excited to start it soon and see how it goes. Next, I have this book, Gingerbread, by Helen Oyeyemi. This, if you couldn't tell by the title, is a retelling of Hansel and Gretel. I have read some other works by Helen Oyeyemi and really enjoyed them. Her short story collection, What Is Not Yours Is Not Yours, is really good. I've also read Boy Snow Bird by her, which is a very loose retelling of Snow White. I think that Gingerbread will be the same way, a very, very loose inspired by, maybe more so than a retelling of. But I've read What Is Not Yours Is Not Yours by her, as well as Boy Snowbird, and there's another book by her that I've read, but I can't remember what it's called right now. I'll think of it, or I won't. We'll see. Influenced by the mysterious place gingerbread holds in classic children's stories, the beloved best-selling author of Boy Snowbird and What Is Not Yours Is Not Yours invites readers into a delightfully inventive and bewitching novel about a surprising family legacy in which the inheritance is a recipe. Whatever that means. So I'm going to give this a go after Frankenstein. We'll see where it takes me. And then finally, rounding out our to-be-read list is a to-be reread. This is The Devil Wears Prada. I have read this book already, I think twice, maybe 3 times, and I am really considering making a video, maybe ASMR, maybe not ASMR, about this book and how it compares to the movie adaptation. The movie is so culturally significant and so beloved, but I think that much fewer people have read the book than have read the movie, and I have a lot of thoughts about the way they chose to adapt this book. I love the movie as well, but there's certain things that they changed from the book to the movie, and I have a lot of thoughts about it, so I might make a video about it. So I don't know if I will reread this book in full, but I might just read snippets of it in order to make that video. So I don't know if I'll reread this last, but I might just read a couple snippets here and there to jog my memory, to refresh my memory. I probably don't need to tell you what this book is about. I'm sure you are familiar with it, even if you haven't seen the movie. It's so culturally significant that you probably know the gist. So those are all the books I've been both reading recently and plan to read soon. I'd love to know if you have read any of them, and if so, what did you think? If you have books that you would recommend, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. And as always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Good night. Good night. Good night.